One of the most famed American fighter squadrons of World War II was a segregated group of black airmen who would serve America to great fame and be forever known as the Tuskegee Airmen. And one of those famed history-making men was a young man from Portland, Maine. Eugene B. Jackson was born on June 26 of 1923 to Alexander and Marguerite Ruby Jackson. Eugene's ancestors had first arrived in Maine in 1759, and now Eugene was being raised in Portland. By 1930, Alexander and Marguerite had separated, and while Marguerite struggled to cope with divorce, Eugene was sent to live with his maternal grandparents, William and Blanche Ruby. Eugene was raised in the family's rented home at 221 Valley Street, and he was educated in the Portland public schools. On June 19 of 1941, Eugene graduated from Portland High School. Eugene would later explain that growing up in Maine was a blessing, as prejudice and hatred were not something he often experienced. But that was all about to change. On December 7th of 1941, the Japanese attack on the Hawaiian Islands dragged a neutral America into the fray of World War II in both Europe and in the Pacific theaters of war. Immediately, Eugene wanted to enlist, but restrictions against African Americans made enlistment difficult. Yet, on October 29th of 1942, Eugene Jackson enlisted in the United States Army Air Corps at a Portland recruitment office. He was immediately sent to Fort Devens in Middlesex County, Massachusetts. Soon after boot camp was completed, Eugene found himself at Moton Field in Tuskegee, Alabama. While white American soldiers and seamen were being trained and quickly shipped out to serve in either of the two theaters of war, black Americans were not widely circulated for such service in the segregated American military of World War II. Though the black Americans who were now serving in the United States military were generally relegated to positions as kitchen staff, laundry workers, servants, or manual labor positions, these new recruits at Tuskegee were being trained for a greater military purpose. These black American soldiers were about to make history as the United States faced a great threat in both Europe and in the Pacific. And President Franklin Delano Roosevelt sought an all-hands-on-deck approach for building America's war machine. Roosevelt wanted every able American to do their part, be they male or female, and he wanted American segregation to eventually come to a permanent end. And opening the United States military to include African American soldiers would greatly bolster America's military ranks. These enlisted black Americans at Tuskegee would become the first trained combat and bombardier pilots, aircraft mechanics, and electronics and bomb technicians in United States history. And Portland's Eugene B. Jackson was now officially one of these history-making American airmen. Yet, there was still a long road ahead, one filled with abject racism, bigotry-based limitations, and severe challenges. While at Tuskegee, Private Eugene Jackson was stunned by the abject racism and venomous bigotry he faced while in Alabama. The difference Jackson experienced between his former life in Maine and the life he was now living in the American South was brutally and abhorrently clear. Yet, Jackson's Army training was not as limited to the airfields of Tuskegee as was the training for the African American pilots. Jackson quickly made friends with the other airmen at Tuskegee, and he soon earned the nickname of Sonny. For Private Jackson, he was now being trained in the field of electronics, and most especially in radio technology. Technically, Jackson's job was as an aircraft mechanic, for which he was also fully trained, but his specialty would be to install, service, repair, and replace aircraft radios, and to ensure continual communications between commanders on the ground and the pilots and crewmen in the air. For this special training in radio and electronics, Jackson was sent to different training schools all across the United States. By the time Jackson reunited with his fellow Tuskegee Airmen, he found that his squadron of men at Tuskegee were just sitting idle. But This fully trained and ready-to-fight squadron of black soldiers were not yet allowed to join in the fighting, even though their training was complete and they were ready to ship out. Then, in 1944, Jackson was assigned as a member of the 332nd Fighter Group, and these men of Tuskegee were finally deployed to the European theater of war in Italy. The 332nd Group then were assigned to fly the new P-51 Mustang fighter planes, which were repainted with a special red tail, so all who witnessed their exploits would recognize their presence in the air. Thus, the 332nd became known as the Red Tails. Shortly after the June 6, 1944, D-Day invasion of Normandy, France, the 332nd was moved from Italy to North Africa. From there, the group flew nearly 200 air combat and escort missions over Nazi-occupied areas, and this 332nd Group racked up such impressive mission statistics that the impressive legend of the 332nd had begun. The exploits of the Red Tail Squadron was reported all across Europe, the Pacific, and especially here in the United States. Although it would happen slowly, many civilians and military personnel who harbored the idea that black persons had limited thought and ability were suddenly changing their minds. And many white American pilots and aircraft crewmen who witnessed the amazing abilities of these Red Tails while in air combat now owed their lives to these black soldiers. Today, these legendary Tuskegee Airmen are well known as the first heroic and daring air group of black American military men in United States history. Their legendary courage, success, and exemplary war record has morphed into a patriotic American legend that began to change the hearts and minds of many, not only in the military, but in the racially divided United States as well. When the war in Europe ended on May 8 of 1945, also known as VE Day, the famed 332nd Fighter Group was allowed to stand down, and Sergeant Eugene "Sonny" Jackson would soon be mustered out of service and sent back home to Maine. The Red Tails Group had become legendary. These Tuskegee men, who were once barred from fighting, had racked up an amazing record of 15,000 individual sorties, over 179 bomber escort missions, and they had destroyed nearly 275 enemy planes. And though these men of the Red Tails were flying prop-propelled planes, they also amazingly shot down 3 German fighter jets. These now legendary Tuskegee Airmen were bestowed numerous awards and citations from a grateful nation. These awards included the Presidential Unit Citation and over 150 individual Distinguished Flying Cross medals. By late 1945, the war in the Pacific had also ended, and most of America's military personnel were finally allowed to go home. For the men of Tuskegee, history had been made, minds and hearts had been altered, and their service had come to an end. But the world they would now return home to would return these war heroes to a world where bigotry and racism was still prevalent. In the fall of 1945, Eugene Jackson was honorably discharged from the United States Army Air Corps with the rank of Master Sergeant. He would now return back to Portland, Maine, with the training and experience he gained during World War II. And that training and experience would allow him better employment opportunities in peacetime. With shining examples of courage and determination by such black Americans serving their nation in a time of war, America's racial history began to change. On July 26 of 1948, President Harry Truman signed Executive Order No. 9981, which commanded that all branches of the United States military be completely and immediately desegregated. As soon as Eugene Jackson returned home to Portland, he settled back into private life in Maine. But within 5 years, the Korean conflict saw him recalled to active duty in 1951. This time, his experience in the United States military would be quite different. Not only was the American military now desegregated, the United States Army Air Corps was now a brand new branch of the United States military. Jackson's duties were now to train new military recruits, both black and white, and helped get America's new United States Air Force ready for its military duties of the Korean War. By early 1952, Jackson returned home after having once again served his nation, and he returned back to the rented family home at 221 Valley Street in Portland. Later that year, on a trip to Boston, Eugene met Constance Cordis, a Boston public school teacher, and the two fell in love. 2 years later, Eugene moved out of Portland and married Constance. The two settled down into their purchased home at Marshfield in Massachusetts. By 1995, the film Tuskegee Airmen was released in theaters nationwide, and the movie told the overall story of one of the greatest military groups of World War II and how their heroism and tenacity had begun to change race relations in America. On March 29th of 2007, in an official ceremony held in the United States Capitol Rotunda at Washington, President George W. Bush personally handed out Congressional Gold Medal awards to the surviving Tuskegee Airmen who had served in World War II. This prestigious medal was awarded to these heroes who, in recognition of their unique military record, inspired revolutionary reform in the United States Armed Forces. And on November 10th of 2012, the town of Marshfield, Massachusetts, celebrated Eugene Jackson Day to honor their adopted son who, while serving his country during World War II, became an instrument of racial equality and understanding in America. 3 years later, on September 20th of 2015, 92-year-old Eugene "Sonny" Jackson died at his home in Marshfield. He was given a military funeral with full military honors and interred at the Massachusetts National Cemetery in Bourne, Massachusetts. When America went to war in 1941, men from all over Maine patriotically joined America's military effort, and they did so in record numbers. One of those men, Eugene Jackson of Portland, Maine, answered his nation's call to arms and became part of a legendary military fighter group who helped win the war in Europe and changed American history. And today, during Black History Month, we remember the great individual contribution of Portland's Eugene Jackson as one of the best and most legendary examples ever found in our Stories from Maine.